Chapter 11, Garage Church, from JE2US-A Novel. Saturday morning, 6 a.m., was the most common gathering time for the Brotherhood church. Many slave owners would party late on Friday night, sleeping in on Saturday, affording slaves a bit more free time before they were expected to be on the job. The top floor of a parking ramp was the sanctuary this morning. The sun was just cresting over the Mississippi River as an accordion breathed the first strains of music. Most people were clumped in groups, sitting on blankets spread across the concrete. Some had coffee, some had bread. They were enjoying a late breakfast as the service began. There was no stage, no chairs, no sound system, just a lot of world-weary humans looking for a smidgen of hope. 300 or so, all with inked digits on their right hands. The gathering was a complete hodgepodge of age, race, and culture. There was no demographic for pigeonholing the Brotherhood. They were an eclectic breed of outcasts. The one thing they had in common was the one thing they despised. Yet that one thing drew them together like family. In fact, within the Brotherhood, they often referred to one another as the family. A large black man, missing his right arm just below the elbow, was the leader of this family. He had visible scars on his cheek and a distinct limp when he walked. In the absence of a right hand, his number had been tattooed to his forehead. He wore no robe, no vestments, just garage sale jeans and a t-shirt. They called him Father John. In spite of his many physical flaws, he radiated warmth. His voice had a tenderness that drew people to him. He had kindness that embraced you once you made peace with the scars. He hadn't been elected. He hadn't sought the role as leader. He simply fell into what was needed of him by the people he loved. The clumps of gathered people quieted, and the music began again. We didn't know where Jesus was taking us this morning, but then you could say that about every one of our daily field trips. Jesus wasn't much for publishing an itinerary or appraising us of his long-range plans. But then again, it seemed doubtful that he actually had any long-range plans. We turned right on Hennepin Avenue and into a parking garage. He was whistling as he started ascending the stacked circles to the top floor. It wasn't until we were 2 floors from the top that I began to hear the faint music. The melody gradually melded with the tune Jesus was whistling. I knew this song. Now I heard a voice, a beautiful voice. It was pure and innocent, singing words that a voice that pure should know nothing about. We shall overcome, we shall overcome, we shall overcome someday. Here in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. And we rounded one more floor. The music got louder. We'll walk hand in hand. We'll walk hand in hand. We'll walk hand in hand someday. Here in my heart, I do believe we'll walk hand in hand someday. And the next verse, we shall live in peace. We shall live in peace. We shall live in peace someday. Here in my heart, I do believe we shall live in peace someday. We came around the last corner into the open-air balcony of the ramp. I could now hear the music lightly bouncing off the neighboring buildings. A gentle breeze reached us, dissolving the smell of oil and asphalt. I took a deep breath. My eyes adjusted to the light, taking in the makeshift service that was in progress. I knew right away this was the Church of the Brotherhood. It had that unrehearsed informality of a people steeped in poverty. Some of us looked at Jesus as if to ask, what are we doing here? He never broke his gaze from the girl singing and quietly began singing along. We are not afraid. We are not afraid. We shall overcome someday. Here in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. It was halfway through that verse that I recognized the girl, the singer. It was Maddie. She had an angelic voice, so pure, so free. Her eyes were closed and she sang as if blissfully unaware of her caged existence. Jesus slowly walked through the crowd, stepping over and around blankets and bodies, always keeping his eyes on Maddie. She started in on the next verse. We shall all be free. We shall all be free. We shall all be free She was only a couple of lines into that verse. Jesus within 10 feet of her when she heard and recognized his voice. Her eyes popped open. A smile spread across her face that instantly spoke of her love for him. She kept singing, but walked to his side and leaned into his shoulder as she sang. Most of the rest of us hung back a bit, feeling that awkward mixture of not wanting to be there, sensing that we were intruding on a private protest rally with no horse in the race, no purpose to picket. Yet, yeah, we all had things we needed to overcome, but to sing that in unison with those who were truly oppressed seemed inappropriate. Jesus, however, didn't seem to have those reservations. It appeared like he was identifying completely with the Brotherhood, ready to raise his fist in the air in solidarity. Maddie saw me, smiled, and waved. That felt good, even though I knew how positively foolish it would be to fall in love with a slave. I seemed to be heading down that path, oblivious to reason. She finished the song, grabbed my hand, and sat Jesus and me down on a shared blanket. We whispered a few things to each other, not really aware of what else was going on. Finally, realizing the lengthy vacuum of activity, we looked up. Father John was staring at Jesus, wearing an uncomfortable concoction of fear and awe. This was not typical. Father John feared no one. That was the reason he carried scars and limps. He didn't withhold truth for the sake of self-preservation. In fact, he had surgically removed the numbers and the chip from the back of his own hand with a pocket knife on 2 occasions, refusing to wear the label of slave. After his second rebellion, the authorities had reasoned with him. Either leave the number and chip, or we will have to take drastic measures. He had looked them in the eye and said, do what you have to do. They cut off his right hand and tattooed his number to his forehead. I felt Maddie tense behind me as she tried to read this foreign expression in the Father's eyes. Finally, he gathered himself and began to speak. Family, friends. He cleared his throat and cast a sideways glance at Jesus. I don't know exactly how to tell you this, but I believe that this might be the day that we have been waiting for, praying for. I smell the fragrance of a violet not yet opened. He let that settle. He turned to look at Jesus. This man, Jesus, I believe that he is the one sent from God, the one who comes to make everything right. The fear was now gone, replaced by a breathless anticipation. He is the one who will bring peace. He is the one who comes to set us free. His last word hung in the air, but wasn't allowed the space to finish its import because a booming voice intruded from the back of the gathering. Silence! Enough! We wheeled around to the sight of Sebastian and 30 of his black-robed shadows. Sebastian pointed his finger at Father John and said through gritted teeth, "Unless you wish to lose your other arm, I suggest you sit down and shut up." Father John uncharacteristically retreated. Sebastian, followed closely by his flock, swarmed to the front and circled Jesus. The rustling of fabric the fabric made it sound as if a shivering wind was descending upon us. When Jesus and those of us sitting toward the front were completely surrounded, the priests all raised their arms, creating a sense of wingspan to engulf us, and then began quietly humming. The faint melody felt ancient and dark. "Slaves, scum," began Sebastian softly. "I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but you will not overcome." He shouted the last phrase. And Jesus, this Jesus is not the one. He is not your hero. He is not your savior. He is not God. The humming amplified. Then slowly, "and he will not set you free." As if wanting to educate a band of ignorant beasts, he continued with a condescending lilt. "Jesus is just a wannabe, an illusionist. He's wrapped a few magic tricks into a sales pitch, dragging you all into his 15 minutes of fame." The priest droned on. "But don't be mistaken. He can't set you free." He thumped his chest with a fist as he said, "We are what freedom looks like. You will never be free. You will forever serve and fear us." He ruffled his feathers and slithered in a tight circle around Jesus. "I would venture to prophesy that this man, by the end of this year, will be a slave." Then, as if coming up with a clever idea, "In fact, I may purchase him myself." "Tell them, Jesus," he challenged. "Tell them what a fraud you are." I was slouching from my spot on the blanket, trying to keep my distance, not making eye contact. Jesus, on the other hand, was nonplussed by Sebastian and his speech. Now Jesus walked a circle around Sebastian. He reached out to take a pinch of fabric from Sebastian's robe between his fingers. The drone of the priest stopped as Jesus spoke. "These are fine piece goods. Certainly nothing a slave could ever afford. Nothing I could afford," added Jesus with a smile. Then he looked out to the family, addressing them. "Sebastian and his friends come with starched robes, cleaned, pressed, the smell of wealth, doused in a cologne of affluence and power. But do you know what is under these robes?" Jesus looked at Sebastian. Then with one swift motion, he tore the robe from the priest standing beside Sebastian, revealing decomposing flesh hanging from an exposed skeleton, pus dripping from open sores. Immediately, stench filled the air. It was so acrid that even some of the priests covered their nostrils. The naked priest scrambled to retrieve the robe and fashion it about his shoulders. Jesus continued, "All shiny on the outside, but underneath, faux righteousness, rotting flesh on religious bones. The aroma hovers, crouching, waiting to infect anyone touched by their presence. They wear power like an inheritance, but they are just the bastard children of darkness." Now Jesus looked back to the family. "The priests of Baal strut around as if they are free. Look in their eyes. Do you see joy? Do you see peace? Do you see contentment? Do you see freedom? You, the Brotherhood, my family, you can have inner freedom, a freedom they will never know. You can carry your expansive liberty with you into any confined reality. They, on the other hand, must carry their caged souls into every dark corner. So who is really free? I say they are more slaves than you are. They just haven't realized it yet." With that, Jesus reached out his hand as if to shake Sebastian's hand. He gripped it hard. Then, looking him in the eye, he said, Who is your master, Sebastian? Sebastian glared back at him. Jesus didn't let go of his hand, and you could see the discomfort grow. Then Sebastian's eyes grew suddenly wide. Wincing, he let out a muffled scream, feeling a searing sensation on the back of his right hand. With Jesus' hand still locked in a death grip, Sebastian rotated his hand to see what was burning. He saw smoke rising from his skin as an invisible force branded the back of his hand with a slave number. Sebastian, face contorted with horror, shoved Jesus away and ran from the gathering. The black-robed murder of crows descended the parking ramp in full flight, Sebastian's guttural screams lending an eeriness to their southerly migration. We listened as the flapping of robes faded into the distance. As the family settled, Jesus gestured to us, his tribe. He invited us up to join him in front of the Brotherhood. We stood in a line facing them. Then he said, I bring you freedom. Freedom in the middle of slavery. Peace in the middle of chaos. Contentment in the middle of want. Love in the middle of abandonment. Then he grabbed my hand, clasped it, and raised it. I grabbed John's hand and raised it. We all raised our hands in the air. Then Jesus continued, I will never abandon you. I am your brother. He looked down the line. We are your family. The moment he said that, I felt an intense burning sensation on my hand. It was now happening to us, the tribe. We watched and moaned as each of our right hands were branded with a number. There was confusion, fear, chaos. Why? Thoughts raced. But Jesus, I don't want to be a slave, Thomas cried out in pain. Judas started rubbing at the brand, frantically trying to erase it. Bartholomew quietly said, if we have nothing to sacrifice, we have nothing to gain. Maddie approached me and tenderly held my hand, tracing the number with her fingertips. She smiled and held me. I had a moment of revelation. For the first time in my life, somewhat understanding what it meant to be one of the forgotten, the nobodies. And for some odd reason, I felt a sense of release, a strange sense of freedom. James, John, and Peter had big smiles on their faces. This was the war they had been hoping for, the cause célèbre that would give purpose to the tribe. To them, it felt like we had finally found our thing, our reason to be. Jesus knew all of these thoughts and the varying degrees of misunderstanding they represented. But he stood there, hand in my hand, smiling as Father John defiantly raised his right stump in the air and began singing, we shall overcome, we shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Here in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday.